Have you ever, like, been in one of those disagreements that just gets completely out of hand? Like, it starts out
No.
as something small,
Yeah.
and then before you know it, it's this huge thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
way bigger and messier than anyone ever thought it would be. And that's kind of what we're looking at today. We're diving into a legal case, and get this, it went on for over a decade.
Wow.
A decade.
Yeah, a decade.
Wow.
This was a family law case that just wouldn't quit.
Okay.
And one of our listeners actually asked us to take a deep dive into this one. Probably because, well, it's pretty mind-boggling that a case could even last that long.
Yeah, I mean, a decade.
Yeah.
It's a long time.
Yeah. So let's get into it.
Okay.
Back in 2016, there was this guy, Dan Purcaru.
Yeah.
He filed this motion to change a final order from way back in 2009.
Yeah. Now, this order, it was issued by Justice Paisley, and it said that Mr. Purcaru had to pay, like equalization of net family property and also child support to his ex-wife, Felicia Vacaru.
Right. Sounds pretty standard. I mean, modifications happen all the time.
Right. You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
Sounds like just a normal kind of family law thing.
Yeah.
But here's where it takes a turn. So even before the original trial started, Mr. Purcaru, his pleadings were actually struck down. And the reason for that was because he refused to show anyone his financial documents.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So not exactly starting off on the best foot.
Right. Big red flag. Makes you wonder what he's trying to, like, hide, right?
Right, exactly.
And this, well, let's just say his non-compliance.
Yeah.
That kind of becomes a recurring theme throughout this whole thing.
Oh, really?
It really shapes how everything plays out.
Okay.
So, okay, they go ahead. The trial happens anyway, even with that initial setback. Justice Paisley rules against Mr. Purcaru.
Right.
And then it even goes to the Court of Appeal.
Uh-huh.
And they also side against him, uphold the original decision. But this is where things really go off the rails.
Okay.
Mr. Purcaru ends up being found in contempt of court. He serves jail time because he's breaching the court orders, and he's still not making the payments that he was ordered to make.
It's kind of unbelievable, isn't it? You'd think all of that would be enough to make him, comply.
You'd think.
But not in this case, apparently. And then the other part of it that kind of, gets to me is thinking about Mrs. Vacaru and what she must have been going through. I mean, on top of everything else, she had to get lawyers involved again and go back to court just to try to make him follow the original judgment.
Right, and that's more money, more time. It's just, it drags on and on and on. This is about real people,
Mm-hmm.
So fast forward now to 2016. Mr. Purcaru files this motion, right, to change that 2009 order. What was his reasoning? After all this time, why did he think he needed a change?
Well, he basically said that he had lost his job, had some health issues, was relying on ODSP, which, just so our listeners know, is the Ontario Disability Support Program.
Right.
And he had a new job, but it only paid like $48,000 a year. So he said he could only pay like $560 a month for child support, but. And, there's always a but.
Oh, there's always a but.
There is.
So is it?
So he said he needed his car for work, that it was absolutely essential. And, that made it harder for him to make the full payments, or because that was his argument anyway.
Okay. And this is after, remember, way back when, in that original judgment, it came out that he had a way higher earning capacity than that. Like, he was making a lot more.
Oh, right.
It makes you wonder, right?
It does, yeah.
Like, how much has really changed?
Right.
And you said he was making something like $350,000 a year.
Yeah, you've got a good memory. That's
Yeah.
right. And, of course, he argued that there was no way he could make that much money, but,
Right.
And then to make things even more complicated, he threw in a few more arguments.
Oh, boy.
Just for good measure. Right.
What else did he say? Like, what else could he possibly have to work with here?
So he said that the court-appointed receiver, remember them,
Uh-huh.
they couldn't find any more of his assets. And remember, this is after that whole thing where he was found to have transferred over $650,000, like to avoid having to pay.
Oh, yeah. I'd almost forgotten about that part. Fraudulent conveyance, wasn't it?
Exactly.
So it makes you wonder, right?
It does. You're not alone in thinking that.
Okay.
Justice Myers, who was overseeing all this, he was also pretty skeptical, and, rightly so.
So how did Justice Myers even begin to approach this case with this guy? I mean, with his history, it's a lot.
Yeah, it really is.
So we were getting into this idea of vexatious litigation.
Right.
Can you explain that a little bit? Like, what does that even mean, and how does it apply to what Mr. Purcaru was doing?
Okay, so imagine you're Ms. Vacaru. You've been dealing with this in court for, forever.
Yeah.
Years.
Right.
Spending all this money, trying to move on with your life. And every time, it seems like maybe, just maybe, this will be over. He does something else.
Right.
Files another motion, comes up with another argument. It's like he's purposely dragging it out.
And that's vexatious litigation.
Exactly. It's about more than just this one request to change the child support. It's a pattern of behavior. Like, Justice Myers really picked up on that.
And it sounds like you're saying he was almost using the legal system to kind of bully her, in a way.
In a way, yeah. And it's not just about her, right? I mean, they have kids.
Oh, right, yeah. It's easy to forget that part with all the legal back and forth.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the details. But there are real people involved here. This isn't just some abstract legal case.
No, absolutely. And Justice Myers seemed to understand that, right?
Oh, yeah. And that comes through in his decision. I mean, he didn't just look at the law. He looked at the impact all of this was having.
Okay, so after a decade, after everything, what happened? Did Mr. Purcaru get what he wanted?
He did not. Justice Myers dismissed the motion completely.
Really?
Denied everything.
Wow, really? I mean, I guess that makes sense, but I'm curious, was there anything about Justice Myers' decision that stood out?
Oh, definitely. It wasn't just what he decided. It was the way he said it. He basically told Mr. Purcaru, look, you need to show us you're serious, that you'll actually follow the rules before we'll even listen to you again.
He actually said that.
Basically, yeah. Like, enough is enough.
Wow. That's a pretty strong message.
Right. It wasn't just about this one case anymore. It is about sending a message. You can't just mess around with the legal system like this. It's not a game.
No, definitely not. And it makes you realize, even though, everyone's supposed to have access to the courts, it can be abused.
Exactly. And that's a problem. Because who ends up suffering the most? Often, it's the people who are already struggling.
Right, the ones who can't necessarily afford to keep fighting back financially or, even emotionally. It takes a toll.
Absolutely. And that's something we need to be talking about. How do we prevent that kind of abuse? How do we make sure the system works for everyone?
Right, because it sounds like Miss Vacaru, she eventually kind of won, but at what cost? 10 years of her life.
It's a good point. Even when justice prevails, in the legal sense, it's not always a happy ending.
It makes you think about what justice even means, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does.
It's kind of scary, to think someone could, use the courts that way.
Yeah, it really shows how complicated things can get.
Yeah, and it's easy to forget, but behind all the legal stuff, it's real people's lives,
Absolutely. Like, can you imagine what Mrs. Vacaru went through?
Yeah.
All those years of this hanging over her head.
It's got to be emotionally exhausting. And it makes you wonder, even if you win in the end, was it really worth it? 10 years, that's a huge chunk of your life.
Right. And it makes you think about what we even mean by winning,
Exactly. Is it just about the legal decision or is there more to it? Because clearly this took a huge toll.
For sure. And that's something we often overlook, the human cost of all this.
Yeah.
We get caught up in the legal arguments, but these are real people's lives.
Yeah, and it's not just about the people directly involved, right? It's their families, their friends. It ripples outward.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, how can we even prevent this kind of thing from happening in the first place?
Yeah, because we want people to have access to the courts, but not like this. There's got to be a better way.
Right. I mean, we need to find a way to balance things out, make sure the system is fair, but also protect people from, from being dragged through the mud for years on end.
Yeah. It feels like there's got to be some middle ground, some way to make the system work better for everyone,
Totally. It's not just about the lawyers and judges. It's about the people caught in the middle.
Right. And their families.
It's exactly.
Well, this has been, I don't know about you, but I'm kind of mind blown after all that.
It's a lot to process, that's for sure.
Yeah, it really makes you think. But I guess that's what these deep dives are all about, right? Getting into these complicated issues and really unpacking them.
Absolutely. It's about asking the tough questions. The ones that don't always have easy answers.
Yeah. And even though it can be kind of heavy, it's important, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Because these are real problems affecting real people.
So to everyone listening, thanks for coming on this deep dive with us. It might not have been the happiest story, but hopefully it got you thinking.
Yeah, I mean, these situations are complicated, but just being aware of them is a good first step.
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. No matter what you're facing, try to remember that open communication is key. Even when it's tough, try to talk things out. Try to understand the other side. You never know. It might just make all the difference.